Today, we're digging into a really fascinating ancient text. It takes a hard look at something we all chase, happiness. And it suggests that maybe, just maybe, our constant hunt for pleasure is the very thing that's making us miserable. It's a perspective that might just flip how you see everything. So let's just start with the big question, right? We're all taught that to be happy, you need to get more. More stuff, more success, more good times. But think about it. Is this constant chase really working for us? Or is it just a treadmill of wanting that never, ever ends?
Well, this is where an ancient sage comes in with a totally different take. He says, a wise person doesn't spend their life frantically running after pleasure and trying to dodge pain. Nope. They understand that there's a natural rhythm to life, and they just flow with it.
And this quote really gets to the heart of it. The idea is that good things and bad things are both going to happen. They're just part of the deal. They show up when they're meant to, so why are we running ourselves ragged chasing after things that are, in a way, already on their way to us? The real wisdom, he says, is in accepting that, not in fighting it.
So, how does the sage get this point across? Well, it's not through some super complicated philosophy. Instead, he just looks around at the natural world. Seriously, he found some of the most profound lessons in the most unexpected teachers. Let's take a look at what he learned. First up, the python. Now, you'd think this powerful creature would be hunting all the time, right? But it doesn't. It just stays still and it accepts whatever comes its way. Sometimes it's a huge meal, sometimes it's nothing for a while. This isn't about being lazy. It's a masterclass in being content. It's this deep trust that what you need will show up without you having to force it. Okay, now picture this. You've got a moth, right? It sees a flame, gets completely mesmerized, and flies straight into it. And poof, it's gone. That flame is a perfect metaphor for all the shiny objects we chase. Money, fame, intense pleasures. We get so drawn in that we don't see the danger. But the wise person, they see the flame for what it is, a beautiful but dangerous illusion, and they keep their distance. Then there's the bee. The bee is incredible. It shows us how to engage with the world in a really smart way. Think about it. It flies from flower to flower, taking just the nectar, the essence that it needs to survive. It doesn't drain any single flower, and it doesn't hoard a massive supply for some far-off future. It takes what it needs, and in the process, it actually helps the flowers by pollinating them. It's a perfect model for taking the good from life without being destructive or greedy.
All right, so we've learned from the python and the bee, but now the sage brings it all home with a story that is just so incredibly human. This is where it all gets really personal. We're about to meet a woman named Pingalā, a prostitute whose night of total despair leads her to this incredible moment of clarity.
So the scene is set in this city called Videha. Pingalā has dressed herself up, she's standing at her door, and she is just waiting. Her entire world, her entire focus is on one single thing, hoping a rich client will show up and give her some money. That hope is everything to her in this moment.
And you can just feel the emotional roller coaster she's on through the night. She starts out hopeful, but as men pass by her door, that hope starts to sour into anxiety. By midnight, she's desperate, pacing back and forth, completely sleepless. She hits rock bottom, and it's right there, in that moment of total frustration, that something inside her just snaps. Her suffering becomes the very thing that sets her free. It just goes to show you, sometimes your biggest breakdown can lead to your biggest breakthrough.
And her despair doesn't just fade away. No, it transforms into this moment of absolute perfect clarity. The text actually calls her realization a song. It's like this wisdom just bursts out of her, fully formed. And her song starts with this raw, brutal honesty about herself. She looks at her own behavior and just says, wow, how foolish have I been? She sees with total clarity that her pain was a cage she built herself, all because she was chasing this fleeting pleasure from someone who couldn't really give her anything of value. And this is the real kicker. She realizes she's been looking for happiness in all the wrong places. She was chasing this petty man who could only offer a mix of misery and fear. But all along, she had this true source of peace and happiness right there inside of her. The text calls it the eternal Lord, but you can think of it as her own inner strength, her true self. She was ignoring the real deal for a cheap imitation. So what's the big takeaway from Pingalā's terrible night? Well, she basically uncovers a fundamental law of how our minds work. It boils down to a simple but absolutely profound equation for finding peace. And here it is. This is what it all comes down to. Hope, or desire, Asha, in Sanskrit, is the direct cause of supreme misery, paramam dukkam. It's being attached to a specific outcome, needing something outside of yourself to make you happy. That's what causes the pain. And the solution? Detachment, nairashyam, letting go of that desperate need. That, the text says, leads directly to supreme bliss, paramam sukham. It's a simple formula, but it could change your life.
And the proof is right there in the story. The second Pingalā cuts that cord of desperate hope for a lover, the whole storm inside her just calms down. The text says she just sat on her bed and for the first time all night slept peacefully and happily. The peace she was searching for outside wasn't in some man's arms. It was waiting inside her all along, right on the other side of letting go. So this ancient wisdom isn't just a cool story. It's really an invitation for us to look at our own lives. And it leaves us with a really powerful question to think about. What's the one hope, the one thing you're clinging to, that's secretly causing you stress and anxiety? And what kind of peace, what kind of happiness, like Pingalā's, is just waiting for you if you could find a way to let it go?
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a pretty radical detour, actually, stepping thousands of years back into ancient philosophy to find what might be a surprisingly modern shortcut to peace. So if you're feeling tired of the constant grind, the endless striving.
Yeah, that feeling that happiness is always just one more goal away.
Exactly. Then this dive is definitely for you. We're going straight to some fascinating source material to kind of challenge the whole premise of modern existence, really.
Indeed. We're drawing insights from a truly profound dialogue presented in a spiritual text, specifically the instructions given by a wise Brahmin.
Okay.
And our mission today is pretty simple: to synthesize these timeless principles of, let's say, contentment and sense control into a clear, maybe even actionable framework for achieving mental tranquility. We really want to extract the key how-to guides, if you like, for genuine detachment by looking at 4 really powerful allegories.
Okay, let's unpack this right away, because the core idea here is, well, it's revolutionary, isn't it? Especially for our modern kind of hustle culture.
Absolutely.
Which defines success by acquisition and, constant effort. This Brahman offers a totally counterintuitive premise.
Which is?
That the single biggest barrier to ultimate bliss is hope. Or, maybe more accurately, frustrated desire. The text calls it asha. And if you can master acceptance and control your senses, you are, instantly happier than anyone successfully chasing wealth or pleasure.
It's a complete flip of the script. It really is. The destination isn't more desire fulfilled, but the total stopping, the cessation of the desire itself. And this wisdom culminates in, this ultimate axiom, nairasya parama sukham.
Which means?
Freedom from desire is supreme bliss. And to prove this, we're going to explore how 3 really vivid analogies, the python, the bee, and then later this amazing story of the courtesan, Pingalā, how they demonstrate exactly how to achieve that unpurchased internal state of happiness.
That sounds like the ultimate cheat code for well-being, honestly. So let's start with the foundational philosophy laid out by the Brahman. It's captured right in the first verse of our source material. He starts by hitting us with a kind universal truth. Embodied souls, basically all of us, inevitably experience suffering and pleasure, whether we're in heaven or hell, supposedly.
Yeah, according to destiny.
Why is that framing so crucial? Why establish suffering and pleasure as universally inescapable right at the very beginning?
Because it completely reframes the entire effort equation. The Brahmana states that sensual pleasure, sukham andriyaka, it comes automatically. Just like suffering does. It comes according to destiny, or dinam.
So destiny is already handling the distribution of comfort and pain. Okay. If that's the case, then why bother? Why put in all the effort to achieve something that's just going to arrive on its own schedule anyway?
Exactly. That addresses the core folly, you could say, of human striving. The wise person, the buddha, they shouldn't strive for material pleasures or, sensual gains.
Right.
Since comfort and pain are being distributed regardless of your frantic chasing, which is seen as a result of your past actions, your karma, then that frantic chase for present pleasure, it's just wasted energy. The wisdom lies in figuring out what is within your control, like your internal reaction, and what's outside of it, which is the external result, the DM.
But hang on, it sounds very close to philosophical fatalism, doesn't it? Or maybe even just profound apathy.
It can sound like that.
And the python analogy, which comes right after this premise, it's such a striking image. The inactive python. This is the ultimate lesson in passive acceptance, what the text calls the ajagarati.
The python vow.
Yeah. If we try and apply this to modern life, how do we possibly reconcile the python stance? Just accepting whatever comes with, the basic need for survival, or even just getting things done, basic productivity.
Yeah, and this is the crucial point where we need to separate this philosophical stance from, say, simple laziness or even clinical depression. It's not that.
Yep.
The python, the Ajagara Kriya, is the symbol of perfect, non-reactive acceptance. The instruction is that the sage must accept whatever sustenance arrives purely by chance, yabba patitam.
By chance.
By chance. This is really about minimizing the effort you dedicate to physical maintenance so you can reserve all your energy for, well, spiritual maintenance.
And the text really goes into detail about the full range of acceptance, doesn't it? It emphasizes that this practice is meant to completely neutralize our preference mechanism.
Precisely. It doesn't just mean accepting, good food when it turns up. It specifically lays out the whole spectrum. Accepting the delicious food or the completely tasteless stuff, virasa. Accepting the large quantity, mahanta, or the incredibly meager tiny portion, stokam. The internal state, your mind, must remain indifferent to the external quality of whatever shows up.
Wow.
Your job isn't to find the food, but simply to ingest whatever destiny provides just to keep the body running, without expending emotional or physical capital on the search itself.
That is immense internal discipline. I mean, I think most of us spend more emotional energy complaining about a bad meal than we do contemplating destiny.
Well, that's the modern trap this wisdom seeks to dismantle, isn't it? The complaint, the search for the better option, the regret over the meager portion that is the darsha, the frustrated desire that breeds misery. The python just accepts and moves on, psychologically untouched by the quality of the meal.
And the text takes this principle of acceptance to, well, an extreme level of resilience.
Yeah.
What happens if food just doesn't show up for a long time? The instructions are quite stark here.
They are. If the grasha, the food, does not arrive, the instruction is explicit. The wise person should remain lying down for many days, ahani bushi.
Many days.
Many days. Without any endeavor, anupakrama, they must be content to subsist purely on destiny, diopuk.
Just lying there.
Just lying there. This requires an immense amount of internal stability and, frankly, a profound faith that if you're meant to survive, you will be provided for.
But you mentioned earlier, this isn't laziness. The text clarifies that this is a kind of active inactivity. How does that work?
Exactly. This is key. The source notes that the python maintains a powerful, energetic body. It's endowed with strength and energy, ojasaho balyutam.
So it could act.
It absolutely could. Despite possessing this potential power and active senses, indriya vanapi, it remains motionless, inactive, akarmakam, and even sleepless, vitanitra.
Sleepless.
Yeah, vigilant, aware, but inactive. This is crucial. The power is held in reserve. True power, in this specific context, is the ability not to react, not to mobilize, not to chase, even when you are fully capable of doing so.
Okay.
It's restraint, reserved for the highest spiritual purpose. That's the difference between genuine detachment and just, being tired or worn out. Weariness makes you inactive. Detachment chooses inactivity.
So the python teaches us external non-striving. It establishes that we should stop the physical chase for sensual satisfaction because destiny controls the external outcome, freeing up our energy. But once we've adopted this non-striving posture, how do we maintain our internal composure when things inevitably change? When the good stuff or the bad stuff actually arrives, that's where the next analogy comes in, right? The ocean.
Yes, exactly. The ocean analogy is all about inner poise in the face of external change. It specifically addresses the mental stability required to be a non-striver, to handle what destiny delivers.
Okay.
The ideal state for the munya, the sage, is described as being pleasant, deep, incomprehensible, durvigahu, like you can't quite figure them out.
Right.
Unconquerable and fundamentally unshakable, sakyo, just like the vast, calm ocean, the Arnakva.
I love how the text uses the specific mechanics of the ocean to illustrate that spiritual steadiness. The ocean receives all the world's rivers, but it never overflows.
Right.
And then if the rivers stop flowing in, it never completely dries up either.
It's the perfect metaphor for non-reaction to inflow and outflow, isn't it? The text says that the sage who is devoted to Naraya, the supreme, is compared directly to the ocean receiving rivers. The sage neither swells with pride, not sarpeta, when desires are fulfilled, when things are going great, samdhakama, nor do they dry up in despair, nastuyeta, when they're deprived, when things go wrong.
Wow.
Their inner state is completely independent of the inflow or outflow of material gains or losses. They don't inflate with ego when they succeed, nor deflate with depression when they fail. Their level stays constant.
That is the absolute foundation of emotional stability, isn't it? It means you could, theoretically, perform a really high-stakes job, like, say, trading the stock market or managing a huge company, yet remain internally untouched by the daily ups and downs, the volatility of gains or losses. The external environment is turbulent, but the internal sea stays calm.
That's the essence of it. If you derive your happiness from the external circumstance, you are perpetually a slave to fortune, to luck.
Right.
But if you base your happiness on the steady, unmoving reality of the self, which is represented by the ocean's constant volume, then external events just become like mere currents on the surface. They don't change the fundamental depth.
Okay, so stability established.
Yeah.
But then the Brahma immediately pivots to the biggest dangers that threaten this stability.
Yeah.
Sensory illusion or devamayam.
Yes.
And we get two very dramatic animal analogies here that serve as explicit warnings about the destructive power of attachment. Let's start with the moth.
Ah, the moth. This is a powerful warning about objects created by illusion maya rasite, things that appear incredibly desirable but actually lead to destruction.
Okay.
The fool, the mutha, whose senses are uncontrolled, ajitendriya, is tempted by things like, well, the text mentions women, gold, ornaments, clothing.
Usual suspects.
Pretty much. And the moth analogy is visceral. This fool perishes just like a moth drawn into a fire. They lose their vision, naidele, because they mistook the source of destruction for the source of enjoyment, upabhoga bhuthya.
This speaks so powerfully to modern consumerism and media, doesn't it? We're constantly seeking objects of beauty, new clothes, shiny gadgets, digitally enhanced images online, all of which are essentially mayarasite, created by illusion. The moth sees the light as comfort and attraction, but it's actually fire.
Precisely. Modern advertising is the absolute master of creating mayarasite. It crafts the illusion that buying a certain product will bring you joy or status or fulfillment.
Right.
But in reality, the relentless pursuit of these objects often leads to debt, anxiety, and eventual disappointment, just like the moth flying straight into the flame. The external object looks beautiful, but the internal outcome is, well, destructive.
And the second analogy, the elephant, is even stricter, isn't it? It focuses purely on the sense of touch, specifically physical intimacy.
Yes, it serves as a very stern prohibition, particularly aimed at the mendicant, the bhikkhu. They are told they must not touch a young woman.
Okay.
And the text emphasizes the extremity of this warning by saying, not even a wooden image of one, dharvaphopi.
Wow, not even a wooden image. That's an absolute prohibition. Why the absolute necessity to avoid even the representation of the object of desire?
Because the sensual influence is seen as overwhelming. It can lead to immediate destruction of one's spiritual resolve. The danger is likened to a powerful male elephant, which is trapped and ultimately destroyed, badhetahanyeta, simply because of its physical contact, kogasagata, with a female elephant decoy that hunters have set up.
I see.
The text recognizes that once that initial sensual contact is made, the mind can be immediately captured, regardless of your rational intentions beforehand. So to be a true renunciate, aiming for that complete detachment, you have to eradicate even the shadow of temptation.
Okay, so those highlight the external and sensory dangers. Now let's pivot back to internal discipline, looking at the analogies of the bee and the fly. These seem to dictate the rule for non-accumulation.
That's right.
This feels like the practical side of detachment, like how do we survive day to day without getting trapped by dependency on things or people?
This is essentially the operational guide for the renunciate trying to live in the world. The honeybee principle, or madhukarim vitim, it's all about moderation and nonviolence.
How does it work?
The sage should maintain their body by taking only a small quantity of food, stoka, from each household they visit. Just like a bee gathers a tiny bit of nectar from many different flowers,
Right.
without harming the householders, ahisan, without depleting any single source.
It prevents dependency, doesn't it? If you rely on just one source, you inevitably become attached to it and dependent on its continued generosity.
Exactly.
By diversifying your intake, you remain free.
Exactly. This is the non-attachment corollary to the python analogy. The python passively waits for whatever comes. The bee actively gathers, but only just enough, and never enough to deplete or harm any single source. It maintains independence through moderation.
And the bee principle applies not just to food, but also to intellectual pursuit, right?
Yeah.
Which seems particularly relevant today in the age of information overload.
Absolutely. Verse 10 explicitly instructs the wise person to apply the bee principle to knowledge as well. Extract the essence, the saram, from all scriptures, whether they seem small, ahuvya, or great mahavya.
Just the essence.
Just like the bee extracts only the nectar from all kinds of flowers, ignoring the rest of the plant. This is all about synthesis and focus. In a world where we're drowning in content, social media, news feeds, books, research papers, the wise person following this ignores the non-essential bulk and seeks only the saram, the core actionable truth, the nectar.
We spend so much time today just collecting information, organizing digital files, bookmarking articles we'll probably never actually read. That's exactly the kind of intellectual hoarding this warns against.
And that leads us directly to the warning against physical hoarding, using the fly principle. What specific accumulation is prohibited here, and why is the fly used as the metaphor for destruction?
Right, the fly.
The prohibition is very specific. It's against accumulating food for the evening, sayantana, or for the next day, fasana.
Just for right now.
Just for right now. The mendicant is meant to take only what is needed for their stomach at that moment, using their hand as their bowl. The fly principle states that if the mendicant gathers food and hoards it like a fly, they perish along with their stored food. Hoarding invites destruction, whether literally, through spoilage,
right,
or perhaps more importantly, through the attachment and the anxiety that comes with possessing something that you fear losing.
Which brings us to that delightful, really ironic fate of the greedy householder, contrasted with the wisdom of the mendicant, what you call the honey thief paradox. This one feels particularly pointed, maybe even towards modern capitalism.
Oh, it's a sharp economic observation, absolutely, but built on these philosophical principles of suffering. The greedy person, lubhai, earns wealth, often with great difficulty.
A lot of pain involved.
Right, the struggle. But because they are too attached to it, they neither give it away generously, nadaya, nor do they even enjoy it properly themselves. No papogya. Their attachment actually turns the wealth into a source of constant anxiety rather than joy.
They're just guarding it. And what's the consequence of that?
Well, eventually, a wiser person. The text says the mendicant, the yatya, but it could be anyone less attached, comes along and takes that enjoyment. Like a honey thief stealing the honey from the bees.
So the bees did all the work.
The householder, like the bees, endures all the suffering and difficulty of the labor, the accumulation, but the actual pleasure, the enjoyment of the wealth, is ultimately experienced by the detached sage or the thief who simply receives it or takes it without attachment, without anxiety.
The ultimate lesson here seems brutal. The cost of attachment is that you suffer for something that someone else who is detached will eventually enjoy anyway.
Pretty much.
You pay the price in misery, but someone else reaps the benefit in pleasure. It really reinforces that initial lesson of the python, doesn't it? Striving for wealth is ultimately pointless. You'll either be unhappy while hoarding it, or it'll just be taken or enjoyed by someone else who is detached enough to actually use it without fear.
We've covered sight with the moth, touch with the elephant, the dangers of accumulation with the fly, and overall stability with the ocean. But the Brahmin singles out one sense as, the most difficult to conquer, suggesting it's the gateway to true freedom.
Right, here's where it gets really interesting, I think. He introduces the tongue, the jiva, as atipramatanya, which means something like extremely agitating or very disturbing.
Yes, extremely agitating.
Why? Why elevate taste above these other senses that seem to deal with much more dramatic temptations like wealth or physical contact?
Well, the tongue, which is governed by the delusion of taste, rasa vimohita, is singled out because it relates directly to our most primal survival instinct, sustenance, eating.
Oh.
It's a daily mandatory temptation. You can avoid looking at certain things or touching certain things, but you have to engage with taste multiple times a day.
True.
The Brahman uses the fish analogy to show just how critical this seemingly small sense really is.
Tell us about the fish and its fatal choice.
Okay, so a fish, completely deluded by the temporary pleasure of the taste of the bait on the hook, gets caught by that baited hook, bashe, and meets its end. The analogy illustrates that prioritizing that fleeting sensory satisfaction in this case, flavor over long-term wisdom, is a fatal choice. And it's driven by, the text says, impure understanding, asadbuddhi.
Impure understanding.
Yes. The tongue demands satisfaction multiple times a day, every single day, unlike the temptations of, say, gold or intense romance, which might be seasonal or occasional for most people.
Right.
This constant recurring demand makes the tongue the most powerful agent of distraction and attachment, according to this teaching.
But the danger isn't limited just to food, is it? The Brahma also warns the mendicant about the sense of sound, drawing lessons from the deer, showing how hearing can also lead to captivity.
Yes, absolutely. The mendicant who's dwelling in the forest, Vanakara, is specifically told they should never listen to vulgar or worldly songs, Bhagavatam.
Why not?
They must learn from the deer. The deer, apparently, is captured after being enchanted, literally mesmerized, by the hunter's song, Gita Mohitat. It chooses that temporary auditory pleasure over vigilance and safety.
And the consequences are pretty clear, enjoying things like women's dancing, instrumental music, and sensual songs, Gramya Gitani, leads one to become their plaything or their toy, Kanaka. Basically, you lose your autonomy.
Yes.
The text even cites the mythological example of Yeshya-Oga, a sage who was supposedly led astray by beautiful songs and women, despite having lived his entire life in extreme austerity. Sound got him.
It connects all five senses back to that core challenge. Attachment inevitably leads to servitude. You become controlled by the object of your desire. But let's return to the great paradox of sense control, the one captured in the verses about fasting, because this is what truly proves the supremacy of the tongue in this system.
Ah, yes, the fasting paradox.
Wow.
It states that the wise person, Menai, can actually comfort all the other senses relatively quickly through fasting, Nirahara.
Right.
But this method fails spectacularly when it comes to the sense of taste.
Exactly. If you fast, think about it. Your eyes are no longer tempted by beautiful sights if you're weak. Your ears might quiet down, your sense of smell fades, the need for touch lessens.
True.
But the text explicitly states that when food is absent, the craving of the tongue, rasanam, only increases. Bardhate. It gets stronger.
Wait a minute. If the source of the sensation of the food is removed, why on earth does the desire increase? That seems completely counterintuitive.
It seems so. But it increases, according to this view, because the tongue is so intimately connected to the body's fundamental self-preservation mechanism.
Survival.
Right. When the body senses scarcity, the craving mechanism actually heightens its efforts to compel you to consume. It screams louder. All the other senses can be somewhat subdued by physical deprivation, but that very deprivation only makes the tongue's demands louder, more insistent.
So you can't just starve it into submission.
Apparently not. Therefore, controlling the tongue cannot be done through mere physical avoidance, like fasting alone. It requires a fundamental internal detachment from the idea of flavor and satisfaction itself. It requires wisdom.
So what does this all mean then? What's the decisive conclusion the Brahman offers regarding true self-control? If fasting won't work, how do we conquer the tongue?
The final decisive statement is crystal clear. A person is not truly self-controlled, Jita Indriyo, until they conquer the tongue.
That's it.
The conquest has to come through wisdom and deep realization, not just avoidance. And the axiom is absolute. Jita sarva jait res. Everything is truly conquered when the sense of taste is conquered. If you can subdue this most volatile and persistent sense, all the other senses naturally fall into line. It's the ultimate litmus test for detachment, precisely because it's the sense we can least avoid engaging with every single day.
Okay, wow. So the Brahman now illustrates the profound power of this kind of absolute detachment. And he does it not through some story of a sage who lived in seclusion his whole life.
No.
But through a totally unexpected teacher, someone who's living at the absolute opposite end of the spectrum from detachment. Pingalā, a prostitute, a Vaishya, in the city of Vidya. This feels like the narrative climax, demonstrating that these principles are accessible to literally anyone, regardless of where you start from.
It is the ultimate, real-world, and deeply ironic lesson. The Brahmin himself shares that this was his most valuable learning experience. So let's set the scene. Pingalā, described as a svarin, an unchaste woman, is desperate for wealth, Arthakamuka, and the pleasure she thinks it will bring. She adorns herself beautifully, rupam uttamam, and waits at her door.
Waiting for?
Waiting, anticipating a wealthy, generous lover who will pay her fee, shulkadan.
She is the living embodiment of that asha we talked about, hopeless desire. She's betting her entire self-worth and her well-being on external validation and material gain.
Exactly. She is striving frantically, completely contrary to the python's lesson of acceptance. She watches the wealthy men pass by her door, mentally calculating, will he stop? Will he stop?
The anxiety must have been huge.
Immense, but they come and go. She spends hours standing there, deprived of sleep, the Vastanidra, filled with these vain and hopeless desires, Gvodashir. The text says she's pacing, standing at her doorway, going in, coming out, checking, until finally midnight arrives. Intam.
And no one came.
No one suitable, no one willing to pay. She has completely exhausted herself chasing a fantasy, and she suddenly realizes the entire night has been wasted.
Her suffering here is a direct result of her effort and her expectation, isn't it? Her misery is literally purchased through hope.
It is the pure distillation of misery caused by frustrated desire. And then the crucial turning point occurs. It happens because of her frustration and anxiety. The text mentions her dried-up face, and her dejected heart, utter despair. But this completely negative state actually triggers the ultimate positive transformation.
What happens when that expectation just hits absolute zero?
The anxiety, amazingly, unexpectedly, gives rise to a supreme renunciation, paramonirvida. A profound sense of detachment washes over her.
Wow.
And this detachment, though it was born directly from her failure and anxiety, turns out to be happiness-bringing sukavaha. She realizes right there in that moment of despair that the misery of hoping all night far, far outweighed any potential pleasure she might have gotten from a successful transaction.
So it's a liberation born from the total defeat of expectation.
Exactly. And Pingalā then begins her famous song, her realizations. And they are brutal and immediate. She critiques her own foolish choice, her own network of illusion, Mahavatatam.
What does she say?
She laments her profound ignorance, her ajanwa, for abandoning the true eternal Lord who she now recognizes as the real lover, the true giver of joy and wealth, Rati Pradabita Prada, who was always near her, actually residing within her own heart.
Right there all along.
All along. Instead, she chased after a petty man, Takam, some transient customer who could only give her misery, fear, anxiety, grief, and more illusion. She was pursuing a source of misery, thinking it was a source of joy.
That is the ultimate indictment of seeking outside help for internal satisfaction, isn't it? She was literally selling herself for something she actually already possessed freely inside.
Precisely. And her self-critique then leads to this shocking realization about the very body she was trying to sell, a powerful example of stripping away the illusion, the maya. She sees the repugnant body truthfully.
This detail is often kind of glossed over, but it feels like the absolute hinge of her detachment.
It absolutely is. Her vision is completely stripped of illusion. She sees her body as just a house, a garam, made of bones covered by skin, hair, and nails.
Okay.
And crucially, she notes its true nature. It has 9 holes, navadvaram, that are constantly oozing waste. It's filled with stool and urine, vimutrapurni.
Not a romantic image.
Not at all. And she condemns her own foolishness for cherishing and trading such a foul thing, vigarya vartaya, in this degrading occupation trying to purchase pleasure, kritanapitaratim.
The moment she stopped seeing her body as this precious commodity to be worshipped or sold, it just became, well, a vehicle for waste, essentially. That realization about the impermanence and the unpleasant reality of the physical form frees her instantly from needing external validation for it.
It's radical self-honesty, and this clear vision allows her to understand the nature of the true giver of the soul. In that very city of the ignorant Videhanam is the term used, which also implies bodiless or free from bodily identification. Ah, interesting.
She realizes she was foolishly seeking satisfaction from false men, when true satisfaction is freely given by Lord Asyuta, who she calls the giver of the soul, Atmadat Kamam Asyutat. He is the dearest well-wisher, the Lord, and the very self, Atma, of all living beings, always present.
That shifts her despair into, well, enlightened action, doesn't it? She asks this profound rescue question that acknowledges the sheer scale of her previous predicament.
Yes, she asks, who else, other than the Supreme Lord, Achvara, can possibly save the soul that has fallen into the Sasarakupi, the deep well of material existence?
The well of material existence.
Yeah. Her vision, she says, was stolen by the senses, Yamutakana, and she was being devoured by the serpent of time, Kalahaniya. It's an image of total helplessness, realizing that only the highest power can save you from this predicament, but only once you recognize your total dependency on transient things has led you there. And her final vigilance, her ultimate conclusion on self-protection, is this realization that the self alone is its own protector. Once it becomes detached from all material things, nirvidyati adakila, the vigilant person, apramata, sees the entire world being swallowed by that serpent of time.
Exactly. The awareness of time's relentless passage, swallowing everything, serves as the ultimate catalyst. It provides the urgency needed for detachment. It converts her anxiety into motivation, not motivation to hustle for more wealth, but motivation to hustle for internal peace before time runs out.
And finally, we arrive at the ultimate conclusion, the axiom for which this entire story is remembered. The Brahmanta confirms that Pingalā, now firmly resolved, completely cut off her hopeless desires born of lust, Canto. She accepted peace, upashamam, and just sat down quietly on her bed.
And this is the line we started with, proven absolutely true through her devastating yet liberating experience. Ashihi paramaduhatnarasha paramasukham.
Say it again.
Desire is indeed the greatest source of misery, while freedom from desire is supreme bliss. And the text explicitly says she slept happily and peacefully that night for the first time.
Not because she finally got a lover or money.
No, but because she completely gave up the hope of one. The bliss was immediate. It wasn't conditional on anything external changing. It came from within the moment the striving stopped.
That story really drives home the more intellectual instructions of the Brahma earlier. It shows the immense psychological liberation that detachment provides in a very human way.
Let's quickly recap the three main takeaways maybe for the modern listener, drawing from these analogies.
Okay. First, the python's patience. Realize that destiny is handling the distribution of pleasure and pain. So, stop striving so hard for external comfort or success that will likely arrive on its own timetable anyway. Reserve that effort for internal work instead.
Okay, python. Accept destiny? Second, the bee's moderation. Take only the essence, whether it's food, stoka, or knowledge, saram. Take just what you need from diverse sources without causing harm. And definitely avoid the fly's error of hoarding, because that just brings anxiety and eventually loss.
Right. B, take only the essence, don't hoard.
And finally, the mastery of the tongue. Recognize it as ati parmathinya, the most agitating sense, and understand that until you conquer taste, that most fundamental and recurring daily temptation, you haven't truly conquered anything. It's the ultimate test of self-control. Gita sarvajait race.
Tongue. Conquer taste, conquer all. So the core finding, really, is that peace is simply the absence of striving.
That seems to be the radical proposition here. Pingalā found bliss not when her desired lover arrived, but the moment she consciously, deliberately abandoned the hope of his arrival. Detachment, that nirvana, is presented as the true source of happiness, and it's provided freely by the soul's inherent nature, its connection to the supreme. It's not a payment you earn through effort, but a state you reclaim the moment you stop paying for false happiness with misery and anxiety.
That reframes what success looks like entirely, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Success isn't gaining something new, it's realizing you no longer need it.
Absolutely. And maybe here's a final thought to leave you with. Consider Pingalā's torment. The text says she was tormented in vain through a highly reproachable occupation, seeking pleasure by selling herself to men who thirsted for wealth. Where in your own life right now might you be engaged in an extremely difficult, perhaps anxiety-ridden pursuit? Maybe it's career advancement. Maybe it's seeking validation on social media. Maybe it's the pursuit of some ephemeral physical perfection. Where are you essentially purchasing satisfaction, only to find, like Pingalā did initially, that you were actually paying misery for it, paying anxiety for it, when true unpurchased joy might actually be right here, near you, accessible the moment you stop the chase? That's the ultimate test, perhaps, of this ancient wisdom in our modern lives.